Бумажная безопасность, законотворчество и реальная защищенность. Что между этим общего? Способствует ли законотворчество и законодательство развитию уровня защищенности наших отраслей и нашего государства? Сейчас мы поговорим об этом
helpful
с Кузнецовым, директором по методологии
Dmitry,
организации Positive Technologies. Дим, привет.
positive.
А, Прежде чем я задам важный
Before I will ask an important question to which everybody knows about the decree of the president from the 1st of May of this year, I would like to ask you generally,
законотворчества у нас в стране. Что у нас сейчас происходит?
Ну, сейчас происходит то, что мы называем
well, what happens right now, this is something that we call from the paper to real security transition
законы персональных данных и так далее.
security at the industry.
Жалоб на то, что законы не работают. То есть компании не становятся более защищенными, там инциденты случаются.
These laws are not working.
Ну,
Well, can you list this?
Первая область — это государственная информационная.
This is over-regulated. First, a state-regulated system. This is something that state controls directly. The second one is personal data. And the
Интересно, это критическая информационная инфраструктура Российской Федерации. То есть определены 13 сфер экономической деятельности. Это там нефтянка, горнодобывающая промышленность, оборонка, здравоохранение.
influence the economy, like oil and gas, mining,
Системы, которые вот используются в этих сферах, они
different economical sectors,
87-й
which are under
защищать, причем к защите, к реагированию на инциденты привлекаются в том числе и сотрудники ФСБ.
requires involvement of FSB employees to react to this. And the main objective was to provide practical protection. However, as usually, the owners of the system, they try to go with small blood. Okay, let's write on the paper, appoint the responsible ones, and this was the end. Write, sign, and this is what was happening in recent years. It was an attempt of bringing those companies.
И заставить их перейти от бумажек к практической безопасности.
The sound have disappeared.
Можешь ли ты назвать законопроекты, которые в перспективе могут помочь развитию?
In the future, it might help to the development of informational security.
Первый слой
Well, there are two layers. First layer is that we see everybody, law and law drafts.
самое интересное, наверное,
And the most interesting thing that expects us, this is something that you could hear from the Ministry of Digital, is a reverse penalties for personal data leakages. So what happens with personal data leakages? Roughly speaking, if
за покупатель
database
программы лояльности, вот сам магазин, сама сеть магазинов, от этого не пострадает.
will leak, nobody will suffer from it. Yes, those people whose data was leaked, for them it's critical, of course. So,
Нет большого интереса тратить деньги на защиту персональных данных. Для него это экономически не
and for him, it's economically unfeasible. Yes, of course, you can penalize them, but it's not going to work. But when in the HDPR, GDPR, European, they have introduced reversed penalties when you can lose 4% of annual GDP. This is economical stimulus to invest into the defense. This doesn't work exactly, and everybody started defending themselves. But some of that swarm that was
Вот эта часть операторов персональных данных поняла,
another direction, and they have understood that they need to count money and they need to spend money on the security, and this is going to be transferred to Russian realities as well. But the most interesting thing happens on the level below. This is a legal framework of federal authorities, and these are decrees which are produced by different levels of organizations, FSB, and this activity is not seen by the public. It happens in the background, and it tackles only those people who are facing it. For example, last year, they have adopted methodology of modeling the threats, and right now Stack makes state informational systems and the critical informational infrastructure to model capable activities of hackers, and this is what happens on your stand, to model them in advance, how we are going to be broken, how we are going to defend ourselves from this, and they require to work on plans of reaction. What will you do
не тогда, когда это случится, вы должны
in your facility, for example,
систему. И это вот тоже движение,
creating your defense.
жесточайшее сопротивление тех, кто хочет.
And right now, many companies are resisting those who want to stay within papers, but earlier or later, they will have to move to real security. Okay, let's speak about this decree of President as of 1st of May, what it speaks about, and most importantly, what's going to be the consequence of all of this. Well, the decree
Это чрезвычайный
1st of May
нормативный документ. То есть на самом
is the extreme legal document, and it was not planned. No, it was not planned.
введено указом.
And what was provided by the decree already exists in the federal legislation. For example, federal legislation, the same laws of the search activity
инфраструктуры и так далее, обязывает
Other similar laws, they penalize information system owners and make them to help FSB agents when they do their work and when officers are coming, when the employees of a National Coordination Center on Computer Crime coming to you, come to some state company and say, well, from your service, there is a mass attack in some direction. We say, well, everything's okay. Let's say, okay, can you give us access to the system? And we're going to show you that it's like that. No, we're not going to give you the access. And this process takes a lot of time. But right now, decree says, okay, you have to give the access, period. No arguments.
до принятия указа у
And before accepting this decree, CEO of any company did have a right to appoint his
хочу воспользовался, хочу нет.
deputy.
Обязывает
Decree of the president makes him to use this right, and nothing new is introduced. But right now, this set of actions has been legalized. The principal new thing is prohibition for the use of means of defense of foreign manufacturer. This measure was prepared a long time ago. There was another decree that was prepared with a similar regulation. It was discussed more than a year, and the fact that it was accepted, it's an emergency measure because we found ourselves in this economical situation when the certain means of protection are being blocked. And how will it influence this new law and changes in the industry? Well, of course, not just in the industry, but in all industries, because it's related to everybody. Yes, very often you see
вот любую человеческую общность можно
any human society can be divided into three parts. There are people like pioneers. They are using the law because they see expediency for themselves. They have to protect themselves, not because the law requires, but because we have losses, incur losses. But there are those people who ignore the law. Yes, of course, you have to protect yourself, but it's big expenses and losses from attacks are very small. And there is a very big cluster, intermediate cluster, which, well, they didn't hear about this law. Maybe they didn't think about this law. And this decree will reduce this wide part. There will be more people who will defend themselves. There will be more people who will cognitively, after evaluating their risks, will ignore the law. And there will be less
игнорируют закон.
ideas, and even those who ignore the law, they perfectly understand which measures can be applied to them, what they're risking, etc. Well, understanding is the awareness is the most important thing, which have to be available in the cybersecurity. Which law drafts are missing right now on the side of our legislators with the consideration of the new decree? Well, speaking about the legislation, perhaps on the level of the federal law, everything is available. The only missing is technical regulation documents. For example, in the decree, there is a requirement to conduct analysis of the defense of the informational systems. We understand that this is testing for penetration, and we are specialists in this area who know this area. We know what has to be included in the pen test, but this is our internal knowledge. It's not the norm of the regulation.
Приходят
Some state authority comes to you, to the licensee who has two graduates of the university, and they scan vulnerability. They say, we will scan you, it's going to be a vulnerability analysis. And there are no regulation documents which would say, hey guys, the
направление информационной безопасности не урегулировано.
and you have to follow these steps. Definitely.
Факт, но не
So there is a fact, but there is no specifics. No specific, not sufficient regulation. Well, you can do whatever you want, and you can call it execution.
Таких документов разрабатывается, например, там
As an example, the state standards on conducting analysis of
обсек.
dynamic analysis of the secure code and OPSEC is not such some serious language of the security guys, but they specify how the initial code should be analyzed for backdoors and holes, and etc. Also, they are developing similar technical regulation documents on how to react, analyze security events, and all important things which are needed in order to discover these attacks before they come to a large-scale problem.
конкретно
Can you tell us about some specific laws which have pushed and influenced on the industry of information security in the recent 3 to 5 years? Honestly speaking, every law, when it was adopted, gives a certain push to the security industry. For example, the personal data law has been adopted, and the market immediately moved in this direction. Well, nobody understands how it's going to be punished. Nobody understands how it's going to be done. But those people, the left part of the wing, they started thinking about we have to invest into the security, and there's a lot of projects to create systems of informational security protection, personal data protection, and then the law was enforced, and they see that penalties are not so bad, and everybody started avoiding it. There's a federal law about safety of critical informational infrastructure. They introduced criminal code article, and then immediately they start saying, well, somebody can go to the prison if the industrial company will stop operation, etc. And it gave a push, and there was a legal experience, and they say, well, they can go to the prison if they've done pen test and suddenly they've touched somebody else's system, and this instruction has not been followed, for example. And by the way, the law does not give an
То есть вот то, что называется неотвратимостью наказания.
enforcement of punishment. So somebody should stand there with a stick and control that people.
Больших подвижек в этом направлении не видно. Это прям очень жаль.
Unfortunately, it's to say that doesn't work any other direction. But the most important step in a positive direction.
Отраслевое регулирование. То есть идея заключается в чем? Мы
So the idea is,
разрабатывали тему для
together with colleagues, we've been working on this for the healthcare, and right now it's covering other industry
где много всего важного.
care system.
На какие-то системы могут и люди
Protection from the attack of different systems. People can suffer. For example, one person can suffer, and people,
при этом
can be sick. At the same time, the hospital cannot protect itself. They will not have security people necessary for preventing hacker attacks. But on the other side, they have to be protected. So in the framework of the industry, they create the competency center, industrial center, which is a mediator between, and it helps hospitals to attract their own specialists to solve some precise problems and objectives. Yes,
всё в будущем, потому что только
it's I'm speaking about it in the future tense, but it gives certain recommendations. It helps them to design defense systems, and basically speaking, this is outsourcing. Information security is on the state level, and this such realization can work because we don't make them and we don't threaten them, but we help them, and the state invests in solving these problems, and this can be
каких-то бюджетных
done in the direction of some budgetary organizations and maybe some commercial organizations. And right now, these structures, at least there is an idea, and many people support it. These structures have to be created in different industries, in the oil industry, in electrical grids, and many others. But it will take a lot of time. And saying that it will happen next year and it's going to be the boom of security, well, we should not speak about that in these terms. But if you will compare Russian legislation in the area of providing informational security and with foreign ones and Western ones, how can you evaluate our level of development? Because are we too much behind, or maybe we're ahead, or maybe we're plus minus in the same framework in relation to
набору других стран.
certain set of other countries? Unfortunately,
уровень
the concept of regulation level and practical security level,
друг от друга
this is something which are not dependent from each other. Well,
рынок порешает, да? То есть
outside of the country, they will say they were saying that market will decide. For example, GDPR that I was speaking about, introduction of reverse penalties. It's an extraordinary measure, and there was an attempt of making companies. And initially, it was an approach like that. The company evaluates their own risks and they make their own measures to optimize their own risks. And the fact that consequences of these incidents, due to the consequences of incidents, foreign people can suffer from it. It's not regulated by the legislation.
и вот эта тенденция, она сохраняется.
And this trend is maintained in West. It's not so over-regulated, the information security market, but we constantly see successful attacks. And sometimes these attacks, these could be complicated attacks, and sometimes just encoder virus paralyzes some sectors of economy, and this is bad. Our market is over-regulated. We have a lot of legal framework and documents which have to be followed, but the effect is the same.
Зависимость
No direct dependency between level of regulation and the level. We need to look at practical results, and it's perfectly understood by our lawmakers.
жить, а вы так
For example, they say you have to live like we say, but they are saying right now, okay, we are going to help you because we're going to have the problem. Well, it's very hard to say, to see what's going to be the result of this. Okay, the final question that I have to you about the perspectives, about the development of the legislation in the industry which is related to the information security. What should we expect in the nearest future?
стоит ожидать
Well, out of the hot things, we should expect reinforcement of legislation in the area of application security. This is development of the legal framework in the central bank. This is also legal documents in stack, which are going to be reinforcing the set of measures directed analysis of threats, vulnerabilities, assessment of protection, defense, etc. On one side, this is a positive movement because this is a direct transfer from paper security to practical security. But we are going to face lack of specialists who know how to do it, and we see this lack of specialists even today. What else we should expect? Temporary reinforcement of pressure on security from the side of the business. For example, central bank, how can we make banks be involved in security? We can penalize them. We can punish them by removing their license. Central bank can move in another direction. They connect to the level of protection
Операционным риском.
to operational risks.
Слишком низкий, недостаточный уровень защищенности, он считает
Insufficient level of protection,
политику. И
they have a certain credit policy and they increase the level of reservation. So they reduce the possibility of the bank to earn money. Insufficient defense is an obstacle in development of the business, and bank has economical interest to invest into security. Same thing we can see
в 205 указе тоже
in the Decree 250, an attempt of making the same approach. So we rely responsibility for the incidents. We are laying it on the CEO of the company. So basically speaking, on the top manager of the company.
деньги на безопасность.
Without giving any money for the security, they are risking to carry personal responsibility for the consequences. Also, personal interest of the owner of the business for this business to be protected if he really afraid of these consequences.
Ключевые
There are three key things influencing
реальную защищенность
real protectedness of the business, company, industry, and the whole state.
технологии,
It's technologies,
законодательства.
it's legislation, and education.
Только вместе они позволяют
Only together they can build protection which can really prevent hacker attacks when person knows why defense is being made, when technologies are mature enough and the portfolio of technological solutions is really wide to provide this level of defense, and when legislation truthfully helps to embody into practice all these intentions which were available inside of the companies and industries for their defense, for their security. And I think that in Russia we do have very big movements in this direction from the side of the legislation directed at
достижения реальной
achievement of real security of our country. Thank you very much, Dmitry. Thank you.